The crowd fell silent as Tessa Davenport stood on the auction block, her blue eyes scanning the sea of unfamiliar faces that would determine her fate. Sunrise painted the dusty main street of Silver Creek, Colorado, in hues of amber and gold, but the beauty of the September morning in 1875 was lost on her as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the gathering. Next up, we have Miss Tessa Davenport, 20 years of age in good health. Being sold to settle her late father's outstanding debts. Bidding starts at $50. Tessa fought to maintain her composure, refusing to let these strangers see her tears. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been the daughter of a respected businessman. Now, after her father's sudden death revealed his crippling gambling debts, she had become property to be sold to the highest bidder, a practice rarely seen but still legal in this remote corner of the territory, when no other means to settle significant debts existed. A corpulent man with yellowed teeth raised his hand. $50. $55, called another, a rancher whose reputation for cruelty toward his workers was well known. Tessa's stomach churned as the bidding continued. Her father's creditors had given her no choice. Either she would be sold to work off the debt, or she would face imprisonment. With no family and nowhere to turn, the auction block had become her grim reality. The bidding had reached $90 when a commanding voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. $500. Gasps rippled through the onlookers as they parted to reveal a tall figure at the back of the crowd. Quincy Yates stood with his weight shifted to one leg, his broad shoulders draped in a dusty duster coat. The morning light caught the silver of his spurs and the worn leather of his holster. His face, partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, revealed piercing gray eyes that held the auctioneer's gaze without wavering. $500, he repeated, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the whispers instantly. The auctioneer sputtered, $500 from Mr. Yates. Do I hear 510? No one spoke. The sum was substantial, far more than Tessa was worth as a servant or laborer, going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Yates for $500. Tessa felt her legs weaken. Everyone knew Quincy Yates, a renowned horse breeder whose ranch lay several miles outside town. He was respected but kept to himself, and rumors swirled about his past as a gunslinger. What would a man like him want with her? Quincy approached the auction block, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. He handed the auctioneer a stack of bills without counting them, then turned his attention to Tessa. "Come along, Miss Davenport," he said, his voice quieter now, meant only for her. "Your freedom's mine to settle." Confusion crossed her face. "My freedom? We'll discuss it away from prying ears." He offered his hand to help her down from the platform. Tessa hesitated, then placed her trembling hand in his calloused one. His grip was firm but gentle as he guided her through the dispersing crowd. She felt the stares of the townsfolk burning into her back as Quincy led her toward a wagon parked at the end of the street. "Mr. Yates," she began once they were out of earshot, "I don't understand what's happening." "You will," he replied, helping her onto the wagon seat, "but not here." As they traveled away from Silver Creek, Tessa stole glances at the man beside her. His profile was strong, a straight nose, firm jaw shadowed with stubble, and lips pressed into a thoughtful line. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, with streaks of silver at his temples that contrasted with his otherwise dark hair. "Your father was Joshua Davenport," Quincy stated rather than asked as they crested a hill overlooking the valley. "Yes, did you know him?" Quincy's hands tightened on the reins. "We had dealings. He wasn't always the businessman people in town believed him to be," Tessa bristled. "My father was a good man who made mistakes." "I don't doubt it. Most men are a mix of both. He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. I'm not judging him, Miss Davenport. I'm merely stating facts. They rode in silence for several more minutes before Tessa gathered the courage to ask the question burning in her mind. What did you mean about my freedom being yours to settle? Quincy guided the horses down a narrow path before answering. I meant exactly what I said. I bought your contract to give you your freedom. Tessa stared at him in disbelief. But why? You don't know me. I knew your mother, he said simply. Sarah was kind to me when few others were. The mention of her mother, who had died when Tessa was 12, startled her. You knew my mother. How? That's a story for another time. Quincy pointed ahead to where a sprawling ranch house came into view. For now, you need rest and food. You've been through an ordeal. The rocking Y ranch was larger than Tessa had imagined. The main house was built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around it. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn completed the property. In the distance, horses grazed in lush pastures bordered by aspen groves beginning to turn golden with the approach of fall. As they pulled up to the house, a woman in her 50s emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Rivera, Quincy called, we have a guest who will be staying with us for a while. The woman's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Tessa, but she quickly composed herself. I'll prepare the blue room. Her accent revealed her Mexican heritage. Quincy helped Tessa down from the wagon. Mrs. Rivera is my housekeeper. She'll show you to your room and find you some clean clothes. After you've rested, we can talk more. Tessa hesitated. Mr. Yates, I appreciate your kindness, but I have nothing to offer in return. I can't pay you back, at least not anytime soon. I'm not asking for payment, he said firmly. Your mother once helped me when I needed it most. Consider this a debt repaid to her memory. Before she could respond, Mrs. Rivera ushered her inside the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, not opulent, but well furnished with solid wooden pieces and colorful woven rugs. The housekeeper led her upstairs to a bright room with a view of the mountains. The bath will be ready soon, Mrs. Rivera said kindly. I have some dresses that might fit you, my daughters from before she married and moved to Denver. Thank you, Tessa replied, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. Left alone, Tessa moved to the window, gazing out at the ranch. In the corral below, Quincy was unsaddling the horses, his movements efficient and practiced. He paused for a moment, looking up toward her window as if sensing her gaze, then tipped his hat slightly before returning to his task. Tessa turned away, her mind racing. This morning, she had awaited a life of servitude. Now she was apparently free, housed in the home of a man she barely knew, who claimed to have known her mother. What was his true motive? And what would become of her now, after bathing and changing into a simple blue dress that Mrs. Rivera had provided? Tessa felt more human than she had in weeks. She ventured downstairs, guided by the aroma of cooking food. In the dining room, Quincy stood as she entered. He had changed as well, his trail clothes replaced by a clean shirt and trousers, though he still wore his gun belt, a man never truly at ease. You look better, he observed, pulling out a chair for her. I feel better. Thank you for the clothes and the bath, Mrs. Rivera brought out a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and vegetables from the garden. Tessa hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her, and she had to remind herself to eat slowly. I imagine you have questions, Quincy said after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes. Tessa set down her spoon. Several. How did you know my mother? Quincy leaned back in his chair, his expression distant as if looking into the past. I was 16, wounded and on the run after a skirmish with some Comancheros. I stumbled onto your parents' homestead. This was before your father moved to Silver Creek and started his business. Your mother found me collapsed in your barn. Instead of turning me in, she tended my wounds and gave me shelter until I was well enough to move on. That sounds like her, Tessa said softly. She always helped those in need. She was a rare person. Quincy's eyes refocused on her. When I heard about your situation, I couldn't stand by and let Sarah Davenport's daughter be sold like property. How did you hear about it? You weren't in town for days before the auction. A slight smile touched his lips. News travels. I have friends who keep me informed. Tessa sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "What happens now? You said I'm free, but I have nowhere to go, no money, no family. You can stay here until you decide what you want to do. There's no rush." Quincy took a sip of his coffee. "I need help around the ranch. Mrs. Rivera isn't as young as she once was, and I could use someone to assist with the bookkeeping. You'd earn a fair wage. You'd employ me." Tessa was surprised. "You don't know if I have any skills. Your father was a businessman." "I assume you learned something from him." The mention of her father brought a fresh wave of grief. "Yes, I kept his books for the last few years. He trusted me with that at least." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Quincy studied her. "You didn't know about his gambling?" "Not until after he died. He kept it well hidden." Tessa blinked back tears. "I thought I knew him. People have many sides to them, Miss Davenport. Your father's failings don't erase the good in him." His understanding tone surprised her. Most people in town had been quick to condemn her father and by extension her. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked bluntly. Quincy's expression became guarded. "I told you I'm repaying a debt to your mother." "Is that the only reason?" He stood abruptly. "It's reason enough. Think about my offer. In the meantime, make yourself at home. The ranch is yours to explore, though I'd advise staying away from the south pasture. We've got a stallion there who doesn't take kindly to strangers." With that, he excused himself, leaving Tessa to wonder about the man who had so unexpectedly become her savior. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Tessa accepted Quincy's offer of employment, grateful for the chance to earn her keep. She helped Mrs. Rivera with household tasks in the mornings, and spent afternoons organizing Quincy's chaotic business records in a small office off the main room. She learned that the Rocking Y was known throughout Colorado and neighboring states for its superior horses. Quincy had a gift for breeding and training, especially with difficult animals that others had given up on. His methods were gentle but firm, and Tessa often found herself pausing in her work to watch him in the corral from the office window. There was a grace to him when he worked with the horses, a patience and understanding that contrasted with his typically reserved manner with people. With each passing day, Tessa found herself more intrigued by her enigmatic employer. 2 weeks after her arrival, Tessa was hanging laundry when she noticed a rider approaching the first visitor since she'd come to the ranch. She shaded her eyes against the autumn sun, watching as a man in a dusty suit dismounted and approached Quincy, who was mending a fence nearby. Their conversation seemed tense. Quincy's stance grew rigid, and though she couldn't hear the words exchanged, his displeasure was evident. The visitor handed Quincy an envelope, which he reluctantly accepted before the man remounted and rode away. That evening, Quincy was quieter than usual during dinner. After Mrs. Rivera had cleared the plates and retired to her quarters in the back of the house, Tessa gathered her courage. "Is everything all right? That visitor today seemed to upset you." Quincy looked surprised that she'd noticed. For a moment she thought he might dismiss her concern, but then he sighed. "That was Lawrence Bedford, a lawyer from Denver. He represents a man named Victor Holloway who's buying up ranches in the territory." Is he trying to buy your ranch? He's been trying for months. I've refused, so now he's looking for leverage. Quincy's jaw tightened. Bedford informed me that Holloway has purchased your father's debts. Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. What does that mean for me? Nothing, as far as I'm concerned. I settled your contract in full. But Holloway claims there were additional debts that weren't included in the auction sale. He's threatening to contest your freedom unless I agree to sell him my ranch. Tessa's hands trembled. He can't do that, can he? You paid fair and square. Legally, it's complicated. Holloway has judges in his pocket. Quincy ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I won't sell and I won't let him take you back. I just need to figure out our next move. Our next move, Tessa echoed, both comforted and alarmed by his inclusion of her in his plans. Yes, our next move. We're in this together now, Miss Davenport. His gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I gave you my word about your freedom and I don't break my promises. That night, Tessa couldn't sleep. The thought of being forced back into servitude terrified her, but equally unsettling was the realization that her presence was now causing problems for Quincy. He had already done so much for her, and she couldn't bear to be the reason he might lose his ranch. By morning, she had made a decision. She packed the few belongings Mrs. Rivera had given her and wrote a note explaining that she couldn't allow Quincy to risk everything for her. She would go to Denver and confront Holloway herself, offering to work off the debt directly rather than having it used as leverage against the rocking Y. She left the note on the kitchen table and slipped out before dawn, taking one of the gentler horses from the stable. She had learned the way to the main road from her daily rides around the property and headed in the direction of the nearest town, planning to catch the stagecoach to Denver from there. The morning was cold, and mist clung to the valleys as she rode. Tessa had only gone a few miles when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Her heart sank as she recognized Diablo, Quincy's powerful black stallion, galloping toward her. Quincy reined in beside her, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. What the hell do you think you're doing? I left a note, I found it. Your plan is foolish and dangerous. Holloway isn't a man you can reason with. I can't let you risk your ranch because of me, Tessa insisted. My father's debts are my responsibility. No, they're not, and running away isn't going to solve anything. Quincy's voice softened slightly. Come back to the ranch. We'll figure this out together. But Tessa, it was the first time he'd used her given name and it startled her. Trust me. Something in his eyes of vulnerability beneath the strength made her relent. She nodded, and they turned the horses back toward the ranch. As they rode side by side, Quincy explained his plan. I've sent for an old friend who's now a federal marshal. There have been rumors about Holloway's business practices for years. If we can prove he's using illegal means to acquire property, we can stop him. And what about me in the meantime? You stay at the ranch where I can protect you. The intensity in his voice made her look at him sharply. There was more than obligation in his expression. There was a personal stake in her welfare that she hadn't recognized before. Back at the ranch, Mrs. Rivera fussed over Tessa like a mother hen, scolding her gently for causing worry while preparing a hot breakfast. Quincy disappeared into his office, emerging an hour later to announce that he needed to ride into town. Will you be all right here until I return? He asked Tessa. Of course, Mrs. Rivera and I will be fine. He hesitated, then added, stay close to the house. I don't trust Holloway not to send men to look for you. After he left, Tessa tried to focus on her work, but worry gnawed at her. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered and thunder rumbled in the distance. Mrs. Rivera predicted a heavy storm and busied herself securing the house and outbuildings. As dusk approached with no sign of Quincy, Tessa grew increasingly anxious. The storm broke with fury, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves. Mrs. Rivera prepared dinner, but Tessa could barely eat, her gaze continually drawn to the window and the darkness beyond. "He knows these mountains like the back of his hand," Mrs. Rivera assured her. "Mr. Yates will be fine." But as the hours passed and the storm intensified, Tessa's worry turned to fear. What if something had happened to him? What if Holloway's men had caught him alone by 10 o'clock? Mrs. Rivera reluctantly retired, extracting a promise from Tessa to do the same. Instead, Tessa remained in the main room, stoking the fire and listening to the storm. Shortly after midnight, she heard a sound that wasn't the wind, a horse approaching. Relief flooded her as she rushed to the door, but caution made her peer through the window first. In the flash of lightning, she saw not Quincy but 3 mounted men approaching the house. Their intention was clear from their furtive movements and drawn weapons. Tessa's heart pounded as she quickly doused the lamps. She crept to Mrs. Rivera's room, waking the older woman with a hand over her mouth to muffle any sound of surprise. "Men are outside," she whispered. "Not Quincy, they're armed." Mrs. Rivera's eyes widened, but she nodded in understanding. "The cellar," she whispered back. "This way." They slipped through the kitchen to a trapdoor in the floor, carefully descending into the cool darkness below. Mrs. Rivera pulled the door closed just as they heard the sound of breaking glass from the front of the house. Heavy footsteps moved above them as the intruders searched the house. "Check upstairs," a gruff voice ordered. "Holloway wants the girl alive, but don't be too gentle if she resists." Tessa trembled, grateful for Mrs. Rivera's steady hand on her arm. They huddled in the darkness, listening as the men ransacked the house. After what seemed an eternity, the footsteps receded. "She ain't here," one man reported. "Neither is Yates. Check the barn and outbuildings. They can't have gone far in this storm." Moments later, they heard the men leave the house. Mrs. Rivera squeezed Tessa's hand. "We need to go," the housekeeper whispered. "They will return. There is a tunnel from here to the spring house. Mr. Yates had it built when he first bought the ranch." "A tunnel? Why?" "He has his reasons. Come." Mrs. Rivera led her through the darkness to a narrow passage cut into the earth. They crawled through its confines until they emerged in a small stone building that housed a natural spring. Rain poured through the partially open door. "We cannot stay here," Mrs. Rivera said. "The woods behind the spring house lead to the old trapper's cabin. We will be safe there until Mr. Yates returns." They ventured into the storm, the wind whipping their dresses around their legs as they struggled toward the tree line. The forest provided some shelter from the rain, but the ground was slick with mud and fallen leaves. They had gone perhaps half a mile when Mrs. Rivera slipped on a root and fell with a cry of pain. "My ankle," she gasped as Tessa helped her sit up. "I cannot walk." Tessa examined the rapidly swelling joint. "It might be broken. I can't carry you through this terrain." "Go on to the cabin, Mrs. Rivera insisted. "I will hide here. Come back for me when it is safe." Tessa refused to leave her. "We'll find shelter nearby and wait out the storm." A fallen tree provided a hollow space beneath its upturned roots. Tessa helped Mrs. Rivera into this makeshift shelter and covered her with branches and leaves for warmth. The older woman was shivering, her face pale with pain. "I'll find help," Tessa promised. "Be careful," Mrs. Rivera warned. "Those men are still out there." Tessa set out alone, fighting her way through the underbrush. The cabin couldn't be far, and perhaps there would be supplies there she could use to help Mrs. Rivera. Lightning continued to flash, briefly illuminating her path, but the darkness between flashes was absolute. She had gone only a short distance when she heard voices ahead. Ducking behind a large pine, She peered around to see two of Holloway's men picking their way through the woods. "This is a waste of time," one complained. "They're probably long gone." "Holloway will have our hides if we don't find the girl," the other responded. "Keep looking." Tessa held her breath as they passed within feet of her hiding place. Once they were gone, she changed direction, moving deeper into the forest to avoid their search pattern. The rain had soaked her to the skin, and she was losing feeling in her fingers and toes from the cold. After what seemed like hours of wandering, she spotted a light ahead, not the harsh flare of lightning but a steady glow. Approaching cautiously, she found not the trapper's cabin but a small campfire sheltered under an overhang of rock. Beside it sat Quincy, his rifle across his knees. "Quincy," she gasped, stumbling toward the fire. He was on his feet instantly, catching her before she fell. "Tessa, what are you doing out here?" His hands were warm on her ice-cold arms. Through chattering teeth, she explained about the intruders and Mrs. Rivera's injury. Quincy's expression darkened with each word. "Holloway moved faster than I expected," he said grimly. "I got word in town that his men were in the area, but the storm delayed my return." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "Stay by the fire. I'll find Mrs. Rivera." "I'm coming with you," Tessa insisted. "I can show you where she is." Quincy looked as if he might argue, but then nodded. "Stay close to me." They moved through the forest, Quincy leading with his rifle ready. Tessa directed him toward the fallen tree, relieved when Mrs. Rivera called out softly at their approach. Quincy examined her ankle with gentle hands. "Not broken, but a bad sprain. You were lucky." He fashioned a makeshift splint from branches and strips torn from his shirt, then lifted the housekeeper into his arms despite her protests. "The cabin is too far in this weather," he said. "We'll return to my camp for now." Back at the overhang, Quincy settled Mrs. Rivera comfortably near the fire and gave Tessa a set of dry clothes from his saddlebags, a shirt and trousers that were far too large but blessedly warm. He turned his back politely while she changed behind the shelter of a blanket he had hung for privacy. "Holloway's men will continue searching," Quincy said as they huddled around the fire. "But they won't venture this far from the ranch in the dark, especially in this weather." "What will we do when morning comes?" Tessa asked, head for Silver Creek. "My friend Marshall Turner should be arriving tomorrow." Quincy's jaw tightened. "Holloway has gone too far this time, breaking into my home, threatening my people. He'll answer for it." The possessive way he included Tessa in "my people" sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. Mrs. Rivera eventually drifted into an exhausted sleep. Tessa remained awake, watching the play of firelight on Quincy's features as he kept vigil. "You should rest," he told her. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "I'm not tired," she lied. "Tell me more about how you knew my mother." Quincy's eyes remained on the darkness beyond their shelter. "I told you the basics. She saved my life. But there's more to it than that, isn't there?" "The way you speak of her." He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed. "Your mother was the first person who ever showed me real kindness with no expectation of anything in return. My own parents died when I was young. I was raised by an uncle who treated me more like an unwanted dog than a child." Tessa's heart ached at the matter-of-fact way he described his childhood. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It made me who I am." He glanced at her. "Your mother saw something in me worth saving when I was ready to give up. She told me that our past doesn't determine our future, our choices do." "That sounds like her," Tessa said softly. "She always believed in second chances. She made me promise to do something worthwhile with the life she saved. Building this ranch, making it successful, that was my way of keeping that promise." He poked the fire with a stick. "When I heard about your situation, I knew what she would have wanted me to do." "Is that the only reason you helped me?" Tessa asked, echoing her question from weeks ago. This time, Quincy's answer was different. No, he admitted. Not anymore. The simple honesty of his response made her pulse quicken. Before she could reply, he stood abruptly. Try to sleep. I'll keep watch. Tessa settled onto the blanket he offered. But sleep remained elusive as she pondered his words, and the growing feelings she could no longer deny feelings for a man who had started as her rescuer, but was becoming something far more important to her heart. The storm passed during the night, leaving a clear, crisp morning in its wake. Mrs. Rivera's ankle was still painfully swollen, but she insisted she could ride if necessary. We need to move quickly, Quincy said as he saddled Diablo. Holloway's men will be searching in daylight. He helped Mrs. Rivera onto his more docile mare, then mounted Diablo, reaching down to pull Tessa up behind him. The powerful horse easily carried their combined weight as they set off through the forest, taking a circuitous route to avoid the ranch. Tessa's arms were wrapped around Quincy's waist, her cheek pressed against his back. She could feel the steady beat of his heart and the solid strength of him as he guided the horse expertly through difficult terrain. They had been traveling for about an hour when Quincy suddenly reined in, his body tensing. Tessa peered around him to see what had caused his alarm. Ahead, where the forest thinned near a stream, 3 riders waited. Holloway's men, Quincy muttered. He turned to Mrs. Rivera. Can you make it to Silver Creek on your own if we create a diversion? The housekeeper nodded firmly. Yes, I know the way. Quincy quickly explained a route that would keep her off the main trails. Tell Marshal Turner what's happened. He'll know what to do. Mrs. Rivera hesitated. What about you and Miss Davenport? We'll lead them away from you, then circle back to town. Quincy's tone brooked no argument. Go now, while they haven't spotted us. With a worried glance at Tessa, Mrs. Rivera turned her horse and disappeared into the trees. Quincy waited until she was out of sight, then turned to Tessa. Hold on tight. This will be a rough ride. He spurred Diablo forward, deliberately crashing through underbrush to attract attention. The strategy worked. The 3 men immediately gave chase as Quincy galloped in the opposite direction from Mrs. Rivera's escape route. Tessa clung to him as they raced through the forest, branches whipping past them. Diablo responded to Quincy's every command, leaping fallen logs and splashing through shallow streams with sure-footed confidence. Their pursuers were well mounted but unfamiliar with the terrain. Quincy used this to his advantage, leading them on a winding path that gradually separated the 3 riders from each other. When the closest one was isolated from his companions, Quincy suddenly wheeled Diablo around to face him. The surprised rider reached for his gun, but Quincy was faster. A single shot knocked the man from his saddle. He lay motionless on the forest floor as they galloped past. Is he dead? Tessa gasped. No, shoulder wound. He won't be following us. The remaining 2 riders were more cautious after that, keeping their distance but not giving up the chase. Quincy pushed Diablo harder, heading for a ridge Tessa recognized as being several miles from the ranch. They're still behind us, she warned, glancing back. Not for long. Quincy guided Diablo toward a narrow pass between towering rocks. As they entered the pass, he suddenly pulled the horse to a halt and dismounted, lifting Tessa down after him. He led Diablo a few paces farther in, then slapped the animal's rump, sending him galloping through to the other side. What are you doing? Tessa asked as Quincy pulled her into the shadow of a large boulder, creating confusion. He drew his pistol, checking the chambers. This pass amplifies sound. They'll hear Diablo continuing on and assume we're still riding. Sure enough, moments later their pursuers thundered into the pass, rushing past their hiding place without slowing. Quincy waited until the hoofbeats faded before stepping out. "Diablo will circle back to the ranch eventually," he said, "but we're on foot now and we need to move quickly." Silver Creek is about 6 miles southwest of here. They set off at a brisk pace, Quincy's hand often reaching back to help Tessa over difficult sections of the path. By midday, the autumn sun had warmed the air, and they paused by a stream to rest and drink. "We should reach town by late afternoon," Quincy said, scanning the horizon. "Hopefully Marshal Turner will have arrived by then." Tessa sank onto a rock, exhaustion catching up with her. What if Holloway's men realize they were tricked and backtrack? "They will eventually, but they'll waste time searching for our trail." He knelt beside her, his expression concerned. "Are you all right? We can rest longer if you need to." "I'm fine," she assured him, though her feet ached and her muscles protested from the unaccustomed exertion. As if reading her mind, Quincy gently took one of her feet in his hands, removing the thin house slipper she still wore from their hasty escape. The sight of blisters forming made him frown. "You should have said something." His voice was gruff with self-reproach. "These aren't suitable for walking miles through rough country." Before she could protest, he tore strips from his already damaged shirt and wrapped her feet carefully, fashioning crude but effective protection. His touch was surprisingly tender, and Tessa found herself holding her breath at the intimacy of the moment. "Thank you," she murmured when he finished. He nodded, not meeting her eyes as he rose and offered his hand. "We should keep moving." They continued their journey, moving more slowly now as Quincy adjusted his pace to accommodate her. The land began to change, forest giving way to more open country as they approached the valley where Silver Creek lay. They had just crested a hill overlooking the town when they heard the thunder of hooves behind them. Turning, Tessa's heart sank at the sight of 4 riders approaching rapidly, and leading them was a well-dressed man she didn't recognize, but instinctively knew must be Victor Holloway himself. "Run for the town," Quincy ordered, pushing her ahead of him as he drew his gun. "I'll hold them off." "I won't leave you," Tessa protested. "This isn't a debate. Go." His eyes met hers with an intensity that silenced her arguments. "Please, Tessa. I can't protect you if I'm worried about you being caught in the crossfire." The plea in his voice more than his words convinced her. With a last anguished look, she gathered her skirts and ran toward Silver Creek, her wrapped feet slipping on the grassy slope. Behind her, she heard Quincy's first warning shot, followed by the answering fire of Holloway's men. She wanted desperately to look back but forced herself to keep running, stumbling and regaining her footing as she neared the outskirts of town. The first buildings were in sight when a rider cut across her path, his horse rearing as he yanked on the reins. Tessa tried to dodge around him, but he dismounted with surprising agility for a man of his bulk and caught her arm in a painful grip. "Miss Davenport, I presume," Victor Holloway said, his cultured voice at odds with the cruelty in his eyes. "You've led us on quite a chase." "Let me go," Tessa demanded, struggling against his hold. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You're collateral for a debt, my dear." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And now, you're also bait for a trap." He dragged her back toward the hill where the sound of gunfire had ceased. Tessa's blood ran cold as she saw Quincy being marched down the slope, hands raised, a trickle of blood running from a gash on his temple. "Mr. Yates," Holloway called, "I believe I have something that concerns you." Quincy's eyes found Tessa's, and the flash of fear she saw there was not for himself but for her. It strengthened her resolve. She would not be used against him. With a sudden twist, she broke free of Holloway's grip and shoved him hard. He stumbled backward, his foot catching on a rock, and fell heavily. In the moment of confusion, Quincy acted, driving an elbow into the ribs of the man guarding him and wresting away his gun. Gunshots exploded around them as Holloway's other men reacted. Tessa dove for cover behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood near her head. Through the chaos, she saw Quincy trading fire with two men while a third circled behind him. "Quincy, behind you," she screamed. He whirled just in time, his shot catching the flanking man in the chest. But the momentary distraction cost him. Another bullet grazed his side, tearing his shirt and drawing blood. From the direction of town came the welcome sound of more riders approaching. Holloway, who had regained his feet, saw them too and recognized the danger. "Retreat," he ordered his remaining men. "This isn't over, Yates." They mounted quickly and galloped away just as Marshal Turner and a posse of deputies thundered into the scene. Mrs. Rivera riding alongside them despite her injured ankle. "Are you hurt?" Quincy asked, reaching Tessa's side and helping her to her feet. "No, I'm fine, but you're bleeding." He dismissed the wound with a shake of his head. "Just a scratch." Marshal Turner, a weathered man with a silver badge pinned to his vest, dismounted and approached them. "Quincy, been a while. Too long, James. I appreciate you coming so quickly." Mrs. Rivera explained the situation. The marshal's keen eyes assessed Tessa. "Miss Davenport, I'm U.S. Marshal James Turner. You're safe now." The next hours passed in a blur as they were escorted to the sheriff's office in Silver Creek. Marshal Turner took statements from everyone while the town doctor attended to Quincy's wound, which was, as he'd claimed, relatively minor, and Mrs. Rivera's ankle. "Holloway's been operating outside the law for years," Turner explained as they gathered in the sheriff's private office. "But he's been careful to cover his tracks. Your testimony about the attack on the ranch gives me what I need to bring charges." "What about my father's debts?" Tessa asked. "Holloway claims to have purchased them." "I've examined the documents," Turner said. "Some appear legitimate, others don't. But even the valid ones don't give him the right to abduct you. That contract was legally settled when Quincy purchased it at auction." Relief washed over Tessa, though it was tempered by concern about what would happen next. As if sensing her thoughts, Quincy spoke up. "You're welcome to continue staying at the ranch," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "The position I offered still stands." Before she could respond, Marshal Turner cleared his throat. "I need to warn you both, Holloway won't give up easily. He'll try legal channels now that force has failed, but he might resort to other tactics as well. I'm leaving 2 deputies in Silver Creek until we apprehend him, but you should remain vigilant." The marshal arranged for them to spend the night at the town's hotel under the protection of his deputies. Mrs. Rivera was installed in a comfortable room with strict instructions to rest her ankle. Quincy and Tessa found themselves alone in the hotel's small dining room after the evening meal, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up with them. "You were brave today," Quincy said quietly, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Tessa shook her head. "I was terrified. Being brave isn't about not feeling fear, it's about acting despite it." His gray eyes held hers. "You saved my life when you warned me about that gunman." "You've saved mine more than once," she reminded him. "I'm still deep in your debt." "There's no debt between us, Tessa." The way he said her name made her heart skip. "I want you to stay at the ranch because you want to, not because you feel obligated. And if I want to stay for other reasons." The words slipped out before she could reconsider them. Quincy's expression changed, a vulnerability appearing that he rarely allowed to show. "What other reasons might those be?" Tessa gathered her courage. "Perhaps because I've come to care for the man who not only bought my freedom but showed me what true freedom means, the freedom to choose my own path, to be respected for my mind and abilities, the freedom to follow my heart." He reached across the table, his calloused fingers tentatively touching hers. "And where is your heart leading you?" "To you," she said simply. If you'll have me. The warmth that spread across his features transformed him, years of solitude falling away in an instant. I think I've been waiting for you since the day your mother told me there was goodness in the world worth fighting for. I just didn't know it was you I was waiting for, until you stood on that auction block with your head held high, refusing to be broken. His hand closed around hers, and in that touch was a promise that needed no words. The following morning, Marshal Turner arranged for a wagon to transport them back to the Rocking Y. Mrs. Rivera sat up front with the deputy driving, while Quincy and Tessa rode in the back, rifles across their laps as a precaution. The journey passed without incident, though Tessa noticed Quincy scanning the horizon frequently, ever watchful. The ranch showed signs of the intruders' search: broken furniture, scattered papers, doors hanging from damaged hinges, but the structure itself was sound. Mrs. Rivera clucked her tongue at the mess but directed the cleanup with her usual efficiency, despite being confined to a chair with her ankle propped up. Quincy found Tessa in his office that evening, trying to restore order to his business records, which had been strewn across the floor. "You don't need to do that tonight," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "It can wait." She looked up from the papers she was sorting. "I don't mind. It helps to keep busy." He crossed to her desk, taking the documents from her hands and setting them aside. "I've been thinking about what you said last night." Tessa's pulse quickened. And I think we need to consider the future." He took her hands, drawing her to her feet. "Holloway is still out there. He'll try again to take what's mine: the ranch, the horses, and me," she asked softly. "You're not mine to claim, Tessa. You belong to yourself. That's what I fought for." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "But I'd be honored if you chose to share your life with mine." She studied his face, the strong lines softened by emotion, the gray eyes that watched her with hope and uncertainty. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Quincy Yates?" A rare smile curved his lips. "I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not just for protection or convenience, but because I've fallen in love with you. Your courage, your kindness, your determination, they've made me want things I never thought I would." Joy burst like sunshine in her chest. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." His arms encircled her, drawing her against him as his lips found hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with all the emotion they'd been holding back. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "We'll need to be careful until Turner apprehends Holloway," he warned. "Our marriage might have to wait." "I don't care how long it takes," Tessa assured him. "I'm not going anywhere." The weeks that followed were filled with a strange mixture of wariness and joy. True to Quincy's prediction, Holloway attempted legal maneuvers to claim both the ranch and Tessa, filing petitions in the territorial court. Marshal Turner's investigation, however, was uncovering evidence of Holloway's corrupt dealings, weakening his position day by day. Despite the cloud hanging over them, life at the Rocking Y took on a new sweetness. Quincy taught Tessa to ride properly, and she proved to be a natural horsewoman. They worked side by side, restoring the ranch to order, planning improvements, and discussing the future. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him in comfortable silence. Mrs. Rivera observed their happiness with knowing eyes, occasionally shaking her head at their stolen kisses, but smiling nonetheless. She had known Quincy longer than anyone and had never seen him so at peace. A month after their engagement, a letter arrived from Marshal Turner. Holloway had been arrested in Denver on multiple charges of fraud, extortion, and attempted kidnapping. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including testimony from former associates who had turned against him. "It's over," Quincy said, reading the letter to Tessa as they sat before the fireplace. Turner says Holloway will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Tessa leaned against him, relief washing over her. So we're truly free now. We are. He kissed the top of her head, which means there's nothing standing in the way of our wedding. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek with Mrs. Rivera beaming proudly and Marshal Turner standing as Quincy's best man. The townspeople, who had once whispered about poor Miss Davenport and her father's disgrace, now looked on with approval as she and Quincy exchanged vows. "I, Quincy, take you, Tessa, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I promise to protect your freedom as fiercely as I protect your heart, to walk beside you rather than ahead or behind, and to love you through whatever storms may come." Tessa's eyes shimmered with tears as she responded, "I, Tessa, take you, Quincy, as my husband and partner. I promise to stand with you in all seasons, to build our future with courage and hope, and to love you with the same unwavering faith you showed in me when you said my freedom was yours to settle." The reception was held at the Rocking Y, the ranch house filled with music and laughter for the first time in its history. As the evening drew to a close, Quincy led Tessa away from the celebration to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He handed her a small wooden box. Inside lay a document, the original contract from the auction, now marked paid in full in bold letters across its face. "I want you to burn it," he said, "to mark the end of that chapter in your life." Tears welled in her eyes as she understood the significance of his gift. Together, they walked to the fireplace in the main room, now empty of guests. Tessa held the paper to the flame, watching as the edges caught and curled, the fire consuming the last tangible reminder of her darkest days. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to embrace him, "for everything." His arms tightened around her. "Our story is just beginning, Mrs. Yates." In the years that followed, the Rocking Y prospered under their joint care. Quincy's reputation as a horse breeder grew, with buyers coming from as far as Europe to purchase his stock. Tessa proved to have her own gift with the animals, and developed a program for training horses specifically for ladies riding that became highly sought after. 2 years after their marriage, they welcomed twin boys, Joshua and James, named for Tessa's father and Marshal Turner, who had become a dear friend. 3 years later, a daughter joined the family, Sarah, for the grandmother she would never meet, but whose legacy of kindness had brought her parents together. On the 5th anniversary of the day Quincy had claimed her freedom at the auction block, Tessa found him on the porch watching their children play in the yard with Mrs. Rivera, who had refused all suggestions of retirement and remained an integral part of their family. "Any regrets?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. Quincy's eyes, which had softened considerably over the years of happiness, met hers with unwavering love. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." "You found me exactly when I needed you most," she reminded him, leaning into his embrace. "We found each other," he corrected gently. "And in doing so, we both found freedom, the freedom to love and be loved without condition or constraint." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Tessa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the despair of the auction block to the joy of the life they had built together, it had been a path of both hardship and blessing. Quincy had once told her that our past doesn't determine our future, our choices do. In choosing each other, they had created a future brighter than either could have imagined alone. Her freedom, once purchased with silver, had been transformed into something far more precious, a life rich with love, purpose, and the quiet strength that comes from facing adversity and emerging stronger together. "I love you, Quincy Yates," she said, raising her face to his. His kiss was gentle but filled with the passion that had only deepened with time. "And I love you, Tessa Yates, forever and always." In the soft twilight of the Colorado evening, surrounded by the ranch that had become a true home and the family they had created together, they stood as testament to the power of second chances and the enduring strength of love that could overcome even the darkest beginnings to write a story of hope, redemption, and lasting joy.